The troops obeyed with alacrity, manifesting more than their usual determination and efficiency, crossed the formidable fence and moved through a skirt of woods, in which General Mansfield, commanding a corps of the enemy, was killed. After an irresistible effort on our part, the Federals were driving from and regained possession of the celebrated Cornfield. There now being a lull in the firing, 3 distinct lines of the enemy could be plainly seen approaching. As they advanced, they were reviewed by a Federal officer, with hat in hand, riding rapidly in front of each line. We were near enough to hear the angry and determined cheers of his men. On, this vast army approached our thin ranks. Word was passed. "Fix bayonets, boys!" Hi, my name is Bill Coughlin, and host of First Person Civil War Podcast. While the generals of both sides get most of the recognition, the Civil War was fought by the men in the ranks, and they told their stories during and after the war. Follow me as I reveal what these men witnessed in the battles of the Civil War. To mark the 163rd anniversary, I have decided to make another special episode using personal accounts and official reports. Major Rufus R. Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin. Lieutenant Colonel Phillip A. Work of the 1st Texas. Captain John B. Callis of the 7th Wisconsin. Brigadier General Marsena R. Patrick's 3rd Brigade. Colonel Hamilton A. Brown of the 1st North Carolina. Colonel Alfred H. Colquit of Raines's Brigade. And Corporal Edmund R. Brown of the 27th Indiana. All vie for possession of the Cornfield at the Battle of Antietam. To highlight the attacks and counterattacks that was the fighting at the Cornfield, I have decided to use a combination of 3 personal accounts and official reports. First, Service with the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers by Brevet Brigadier General Rufus R. Dawes and published in 1890. Next is 1st Regiment by Colonel Hamilton A. Brown, found within Histories of the Several Regiments and Battalions from North Carolina in the Great War, 1861-65, Volume 1. The final personal account is from Corporal Edmund R. Brown, who wrote, The 27th Indiana Volunteer Infantry in the War of the Rebellion, 1861-1865, 1st Division, 12th and 20th Corps, which he published in 1899. All other accounts come from reports following the battle and are found within The War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, Series 1, Volume 19, Part 1, Reports. If you would like a map reference for the Cornfield, I recommend Antietam on the Web. This website has a wealth of information, such as an order of battle from army down to regiment, burial locations, reports, a search by name or regiment, and so much more. For this episode, the battle maps 1, 2, and 3 from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. provide detail of the regiments and brigades who made the Cornfield such a hotly contested piece of terrain. Rufus Dawes was born in Malta, Ohio on 4 July 1838 and had by 1860 moved to Juneau County, Wisconsin, where he worked on the family farm. At the outbreak of the war, he took it upon himself to raise a company of men from his county, and by 13 April 1861, the Lemonweir Minutemen mustered into service and on 3 May, they reflagged as Company K of the 6th Wisconsin, with Rufus R. Dawes as their captain. Just as a side note, Rufus had no middle name, but he signed official documents with R. The 6th Wisconsin was assigned to one of the most famous units of the Civil War. Alongside the 2nd and 7th Wisconsins, as well as the 19th Indiana, the brigade fought at Second Bull Run and at South Mountain, where it earned the moniker of the Iron Brigade. By this time, Rufus R. Dawes was now a major, and the 4th, or Iron Brigade, marched under the command of Brigadier General John Gibbon, in Brigadier General Abner Doubleday's 1st Division, of Major General Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps, of the Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General George B. McClellan. Phillip Alexander Work was born on 17 February 1832 in Cloverport, Kentucky, and 6 years later moved to Texas and eventually became a lawyer in Tyler County. By 1861, Phillip Work was a delegate to the Texas Secession Convention, and afterward raised a company of infantry which eventually became Company F of the 1st Texas. The 1st Texas saw service during the Peninsula Campaign, the 7 Days battles, where he promoted to lieutenant colonel, and commanded the regiment at Second Bull Run and South Mountain. By mid-September, the 1st Texas marched in Hood's brigade, commanded by Colonel William T. Wofford, in Brigadier General John B. Hood's division, of Major General James Longstreet's right wing, of the Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by General Robert E. Lee. John Benton Callis was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, on 3 January 1828, and moved with his family first to Tennessee, but eventually to Grant County, Wisconsin by 1850, where he worked as a plasterer. On 10 June 1861, John enlisted as a captain in Company F of the 7th Wisconsin, which eventually was assigned to the Iron Brigade. Wounded at Second Bull Run, he was by mid-September in command of the regiment. Marsena Rudolph Patrick was born on 11 March 1811 in Jefferson County, New York. He attended West Point and graduated in 1835, commissioned in the infantry, and served in the Seminole Wars as well as the Mexican-American War. By 1850, Marsena was back in Jefferson County and lived on a farm with his family and saw success outside of the Army. At the beginning of the war, Marsena Patrick was appointed as Staff and Inspector General of New York Militia, with the rank of Brigadier General. He eventually served on Major General McClellan's staff in early 1862, and given command of a brigade that May, and saw service in the Shenandoah Valley as well as Second Bull Run. By September, he commanded the all-New York 3rd Brigade of the 1st Division, 1st Corps. Hamilton Allen Brown was born in Wilkes County, North Carolina, on 25 September 1837. He attended the Naval Academy before the war, but did not graduate and returned home. In the spring of 1861, Hamilton enlisted in the company forming in Wilkes County, which eventually became Company B of the 1st North Carolina. By July of that year, he promoted to captain and took command of the company. The regiment eventually shipped to Virginia and fought in the 7 Days battles, where he promoted to lieutenant colonel, took command of the regiment, and led the men through Second Bull Run. As the regiment crossed into Maryland, the 1st North Carolina marched in Brigadier General Roswell S. Ripley's brigade, in Major General Daniel H. Hill's division, of Major General Thomas J. Jackson's left wing. Alfred Holt Colquit was born in Walton County, Georgia, on 24 April 1824. Alfred attended Princeton and became a lawyer before serving in the Army as a staff officer during the Mexican-American War. Following his return, he served in Georgia politics in the state legislature as well as the U.S. House of Representatives. He also served as a delegate to the Georgia Secession Convention, and following that, he volunteered to fight and quickly became colonel of the 6th Georgia. By the 7 Days battles, Colonel Colquit was in command of Raines's brigade, which he led into Maryland within Major General D.H. Hill's division. Edmund Randolph Brown was born on 9 August 1845 in Pulaski County, Indiana, and lived on the family farm. At 17 years of age, Edmund enlisted as a private in Company C of the 27th Indiana. By late 1861, the regiment encamped around Washington, D.C., and in the spring of 1862 saw service in the Shenandoah Valley. By September, Edmund Brown was a corporal, and the 27th Indiana marched in Brigadier General George H. Gordon's 3rd Brigade, of Brigadier General Alpheus S. Williams's 1st Division, of Major General Joseph K. Mansfield's 12th Corps. By early September 1862, the Confederacy had seen a series of victories across the state of Virginia. From Major General Jackson's campaign in the Shenandoah to Robert E. Lee pushing the Army of the Potomac away from Richmond and smashing the Army of Virginia at Second Bull Run, the Confederacy saw an opportunity for an offensive. In conjunction with an advance into Kentucky, Robert E. Lee marched his Army of Northern Virginia into Maryland, and if he could gain a victory on Northern soil, the Confederacy anticipated recognition by European powers. As two Union armies coalesced around Washington, D.C., much rode on what would happen in the wake of these defeats for the Union. President Lincoln, having already drafted the Emancipation Proclamation, desired a victory to coincide with its publication. With Lee's army crossing into Maryland, Lincoln reinstated Major General McClellan to command of the army and ordered him to intercept the Confederates. By 13 September, Corporal Brown in the 27th Indiana had already been on the march for several days. After fording the Monocacy River, the regiment found a place to rest and stumbled upon a critical piece of intelligence concerning Lee's army. When we emerged from the timber east of the Monocacy, we saw smoke rising from several pieces of artillery engaged in the open country west of Frederick. It was now clear that no enemy would be encountered short of that point. But, with skirmishers still deployed in our front, we moved on and finally halted in a clover field adjoining the city on the south. The weather was very beautiful. As we lay down upon the clean grass, we did so with a sense of relaxation and enjoyment that soldiers do not always have when taking a short rest. Still, something of very great importance was about to transpire. This was nothing less than the finding, by a member of the 27th, of the now famous and historic Lost Dispatch, or Order Number 191. The order, wrapped around 3 cigars and issued by General Lee around 9 September, gave McClellan something any commander would dream of: the movement orders of the enemy. McClellan now knew where Lee was going, and that his army was divided. For several critical hours, however, he did nothing, but eventually the Army of the Potomac received new marching orders. The two sides met at the battles of South Mountain and Crampton's Gap, and afterward, Lee placed his men in a defensive line just outside of the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, along the Antietam Creek, on 15 September. The Army of the Potomac began to arrive that same day and through the 16th. On the next morning, the Battle of Antietam began. Around 5:30 a.m. on 17 September, Major General Hooker's 1st Corps began marching down the Hagerstown Turnpike toward Confederate positions. Leading the march down the turnpike as part of their brigade was Major Dawes, in command of the left wing of the 6th Wisconsin, who reached a farm owned by the Miller family. The men scrambled over briars and flower beds in the garden. Beyond the garden, we entered a peach orchard. I hurried forward to a rail fence skirting the front edge of the orchard, where we overlooked the right wing. Before us was a strip of open field, beyond which, on the left-hand side of the turnpike, was riding ground, covered by a large cornfield, the stalks standing thick and high. The rebel skirmishers ran into the corn as we appeared at the fence. He talks about the regiment being ahead of the brigade at this point. Keep this in mind. We climbed the fence, moved across the open space, and pushed on into the cornfield. The pickets, most likely from Lawton's All-Georgia Brigade, now rejoined and formed a line of battle to the south of the cornfield. Just as these two lines met, Colonel Bragg, commander of the 6th Wisconsin, was wounded and handed command of the regiment to Major Dawes, who led his men forward. As we appeared at the edge of the corn, a long line of men in butternut and gray rose up from the ground. Simultaneously, the hostile battle lines opened a tremendous fire upon each other. Men, I cannot say, fell. They were knocked out of the ranks by dozens. But we jumped over the fence and pushed on, loading, firing, and shouting as we advanced. The 6th and 2nd Wisconsin regiments were eventually forced back to the edge of the cornfield before a second line joined them. Forward is the word. The men are loading and firing with demoniacal fury and shouting and laughing hysterically. And the whole field before us is covered with rebels fleeing for life into the woods. Great numbers of them are shot while climbing over the high posts and rail fences along the turnpike. We push on over the open fields, halfway to the little church. A long, steady line of rebel gray, unbroken by the fugitives who fly before us, comes sweeping down through the woods around the church. They raise the yell and fire. It's like a scythe running through our line. Now save who can. It is a race for life that each man runs for the cornfield. This was Hood's brigade, which contained a regiment from Georgia and South Carolina, as well as 3 from Texas. Joining in this counterattack was Lieutenant Colonel Work and the 1st Texas. Advancing now by the right flank, I entered a cornfield and soon became engaged with a force of the enemy, driving them before me to the farther side of the cornfield. As soon as the regiment became engaged with the enemy in the cornfield, it became impossible to restrain the men, and they rushed forward, pressing the enemy close until we advanced a considerable distance ahead of both the right and left wings of the brigade. Rather than falling back to the rest of the brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Work sent messengers to Colonel Wofford to bring the rest of the men in line with him. It was not until we reached the farther side of the cornfield that I could check the regiment. By this time, we had broken the first line of battle of the enemy and had advanced within some 30 steps of his second line, secreted behind a breastwork of fence rails thrown up in heaps upon the ground. When a battery of artillery, some 150 or 200 yards in our front, was opened upon us. The 1st Texas held their ground by concentrating their fire on the artillerists and horses until they were forced to retire. However, the rest of the brigade was not marching to Lieutenant Colonel Work's position. Just at the farther side of the cornfield was the point where I was in great doubt as to the proper move to be made by me. I was aware my regiment had advanced 150 or 200 yards farther than the regiment upon my left, so diverging as to leave a wide interval between the right flank of the 18th Georgia and my left, thus exposing both regiments to attack. I was aware at the same time that a heavy force of the enemy was massed upon my left, and felt confident that in case I moved farther to the front, I would be attacked upon my left and rear and be annihilated. Seeing more massed Union infantry, Lieutenant Colonel Work sent another courier to ask for support, and he continues. Before the return of the courier Shropshire, A fire of musketry was opened upon me from my left and rear, which determined me at once to withdraw, as I had but a handful of men left, all of whom must have been slain or captured had I remained longer. It is a source of mortification to the state that, upon retiring from the engagement, our colors were not brought off. The Union lines coming down from the north belonged to Brigadier General Meade's division, but another Union line, advancing from the west woods into the Cornfield, was the remainder of the separated Iron Brigade, which included Captain Callis and the 7th Wisconsin. I then saw heavy columns advancing on the 6th and 2nd Wisconsin regiments, which lay on our left. I immediately changed front, so as to get a raking fire on the left flank of the enemy's column as they advanced in front of the 6th and 2nd Wisconsin. As soon as this was done, we opened a fire on their flank that broke them up badly, scattering them in great confusion. They, however, soon rallied and returned our fire, making sad havoc in our ranks. General Patrick came up in our rear with support and ordered his men to advance through our line to the front, which they did, but not without suffering severely. With 4 New York regiments, Brigadier General Patrick began his attack into the Cornfield. The troops on the opposite side of the road and fields and along the edge of the woods were now being rapidly driven back, and to check this advance of the enemy, as well as to protect Battery B on my left, I threw my whole command, including the 7th Wisconsin and the 19th Indiana, across the open space and under the rocky ledge, perpendicular to my former position and parallel to the road, when I was joined by the 23rd New York, now relieved on the right by General Meade. We remained but a few minutes here before we had checked the enemy's advance sufficiently to push our lines up to the road, which we held firmly for some time. The 35th Regiment capturing the colors of the rebel regiment advancing on our battery. Rallying once more, the enemy drove us back to the rocky ledge, which we held until our ammunition, being almost exhausted, and the line attacked in flank and rear on the right, I directed my command to fall back to a line of rock at right angles to the road, and about 15 rods from the woods. While this formation was indeed another Confederate counterattack into the Cornfield, it was not made by Hood's brigade, but Lieutenant Colonel Brown and the 1st North Carolina, alongside their entire brigade. The troops obeyed with alacrity, manifesting more than their usual determination and efficiency, crossed the formidable fence, and moved through a skirt of woods, in which General Mansfield, commanding a corps of the enemy, was killed. After an irresistible effort on our part, the Federals were driving from and regained possession of the celebrated Cornfield. There now being a lull in the firing, 3 distinct lines of the enemy could be plainly seen approaching. As they advanced, they were reviewed by a Federal officer, with hat in hand, riding rapidly in front of each line. We were near enough to hear the angry and determined cheers of his men. On, this vast army approached our thin ranks. Word was passed. "Fix bayonets, boys!" The 1st Corps was by this time spent, and what Lieutenant Colonel Brown witnessed, looking north out of the Cornfield, was the fresh 12th Corps preparing to advance under the direct supervision of Major General Mansfield. Forming in line of battle, and to the northeast of the Cornfield, was Corporal Brown and the 27th Indiana. Before the order "fall in" is given, the boys run to their places, ready at the word to seize their muskets. As they stand thus in ranks, they greet the old general with cheers. He removes his hat in acknowledgement and shouts, "That's right, boys, you may well cheer. We are going to whip them today." These statements are received with still more cheering, especially the illusion of victory. Lieutenant Colonel Brown estimated that the 1st North Carolina fought in the Cornfield for about an hour and a half, their brigade's line being extended on the right by Colonel Colquit and his brigade, and together pushed what remained of the 1st Corps out of the Cornfield. My brigade was moved to the front and formed on the right of General Ripley's brigade, which was then engaged. After a few rounds had been discharged, I ordered an advance, and at the same time sent words to the regiments on my left to advance simultaneously. The order was responded with spirit by my men, and, with a shout, they moved through the cornfield in front, 200 yards wide, and formed on the line of fence. The enemy was near and in full view. In a moment or two, his ranks began to break before our fire, and the line soon disappeared under the crest of the hill upon which it had been established, that being the 1st Corps. It was soon replaced by another, and the fire opened with renewed vigor. This new line of troops was Corporal Brown and the 27th Indiana, marching in line with their brigade. Though we have not fired a musket while advancing to this position, when we reach it and the colonel passes to the rear, we open an irregular fire. The difficulty is to see the enemy. He is lying down among the corn. Another difficulty is that our own men have not entirely withdrawn from the front, but the men of the 27th coolly stand with their muskets at a ready, and when they clearly recognize a soldier in gray, they take deliberate aim and fire, taking the greatest care that they do not hurt any who wear blue. At this point in the advance, there was some confusion within the 27th Indiana as to what exactly was in front of them, as officers of the regiment believed no Confederates to their front. But eventually, the regiment continued its attack upon Colquit's brigade. Even before the question has been settled in all quarters, the voice of the colonel rings out like a clarion. "Battalion, make ready!" Instantly, a hush falls upon the line. From one end of it to the other can be heard the click of the locks, as the hammers are pulled back. Before giving the rest of the command, the colonel says, "Now aim good and low, boys. Aim low, boys, aim low," is repeated by the line officers. Then the colonel, "Take aim! Fire!" With instant desperation, we all spring to the work of loading and firing at will. The weight of the 12th Corps began to tell upon the Confederates holding the cornfield, and Colonel Colquit realized the dire situation his men were in. In the meantime, Garland's brigade, who had been ordered to my right, had given way, and the enemy was advancing unchecked. The regiments upon my left, having also failed to advance, were exposed to a fire from all sides and nearly surrounded. I sent in haste to the rear for reinforcements and communicated to General Hill the exposed condition of my men. With steady supports upon the right, we could yet maintain our position. As the two lines continued to engage each other, Corporal Brown attributes the appalling casualties of his regiment to the fact that they were standing in an open field, while the Confederates remained in the cornfield behind a fence. As it is, those who are thinning our ranks so rapidly are not left to accomplish their work unmolested. The attention of more and more of our men is directed to those behind the fence, and our fire is concentrated upon that point. They doubtless think it is raining lead where they are. We observe increasing signs of unease among all the men in our front. There has been a steady stream of them passing to the rear. The situation in the cornfield for the Confederates had now become untenable, and Colonel Colquit had no choice but to retreat under the weight of superior numbers. The support was not at hand and could not reach us in time. The enemy closed in upon our right so near that our ranks were scarcely distinguishable. At the same time, his line in front advanced. My men stood firm, until every field officer but one had fallen, and then made the best of their way out. Corporal Brown and the 27th Indiana, still holding their exposed position in the open field, joined in the advance. At length, the piercing tones of Colonel Colgrove's voice are heard again. The command is, "Fix bayonets!" As we are in the act of doing this, we see our antagonists rise up and move briskly away, without regard to order. We, of course, go wild with joy and begin to cheer with all our might. At the command, our line moves forward, down the modest slope to the tragic fence, over that and on, between the bloody corn rows, with their cut and hackled corn stalks. Advancing our left as we go, we do not halt until near the strong post and rail fence, bordering the turnpike. The enemy have leapt this fence and escaped into the timber beyond. The securing of the cornfield would prove to be the end of the day's fighting, at least for Corporal Brown and the 27th Indiana. But the Battle of Antietam was far from over. The 12th and 2nd Corps now concentrated on the West Woods, the Dunker Church, and further positions to the south, with even more fighting to the southeast of Sharpsburg. The Battle of Antietam remains the bloodiest day in American history, with approximately 22,800 casualties, and the back-and-forth struggle in the cornfield was a key contributing factor to this appalling number. Though both armies remained in place on 18 September, the fighting did not resume, but they did call a truce to tend to the wounded still strewn about the battlefield. That evening, Lee decided to withdraw back to Virginia. Though a tactical draw, the Battle of Antietam was a strategic victory for the Union Army, as it thwarted Lee's invasion of the North. On 22 September 1862, President Lincoln published the Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on 1 January 1863, and stated, "All persons held as slaves within any state, or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforth, and forever free." Thank you for listening to the 51st episode. Links to all personal accounts and reports are now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. Thanks again to Antietam on the Web for the map references. Go check out their website at antietam.aotw.org for even more information on the battle. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find pictures of all 7 men. A special thanks to those who supported the podcast in the last month. Your generosity is greatly appreciated, and it will help keep the podcast going. Follow the Support Podcast link at the top of the homepage. Thanks again for your support. In 2 weeks' time, Sergeant William J. McMurray of Company B, 20th Tennessee, provides next episode's first-person account at the Battle of Mill Springs. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.